The spiritual community says that all is one, yet it is very clear that the very objects around you have their own distinct shapes and forms, seemingly separate. How do we reconcile this, and how everything is actually one? Heavens to earth, sky to ground, abstract to concrete, infinite to finite, center to surface, the singularity to the multitude. These are conceptual terms to describe how the individual things or ideas around you can be connected to something higher. We all know the main comparison for this, God and the world. How everything is one with God. This is also thought of as the Big Bang and the universe. All was once one with the central point before the Big Bang, and thus all is still a part of that. But this is all far too abstract to be of any use. We need a ladder to help us climb from the earth of the multitude of forms around us to the heaven of higher forms that supersede and connects the lower. The best ladder we have is an ancient one, the Kabbalah. However, in modern language, it would be best called the Fractal ladder of abstraction, also referred to as Jacob's ladder in the Bible. The Kabbalah is said to have been created by angels over 10,000 years ago and inherited by the Jewish people. However, the Jewish people do not claim the Kabbalah as their own, because the Kabbalah can accurately map any religion, belief system, or scientific theory onto it in order to explain the nature of God and the universe. Let us begin. Each circle is called a sephirah and represents a certain level of abstraction away from the material, or the least abstract and most specific. At the top, of course, we have God, the Big Bang, the source, whatever you prefer to call it. This top circle, called Keter, represents the ultimate source of all. It is the ultimate balanced point of all things in the universe, as it must be the ultimate balanced point in order to be the thing from which all comes. Otherwise, the disbalance would have favored some pole of existence that would have destroyed everything else. It is reflecting its oneness, its ephemeral nature, into the multitude of the universe, and thus it is described as God and the good. Not too much, not too little, not too forceful, but not too pliable. That perfect center that all strive to obtain, the Tao. Knowing that, let's start at the bottom and work our way up. The bottom sephirah is called the kingdom or Malkut. It represents the phenomenal plane, or in simpler words, everything you see before you, the physical reality. Going up from here, we have Yesod, the dream. The closest scientists can physically measure to the dream is the quantum and ethereal plane, which gives us an idea of what it is. It is a plane of potential becomings, of what might come to exist. Therefore, it exists in a state much like Schrödinger's cat, in partial existence, although some things may be more likely to come into being than others, based on incoming consciousness from higher spheres. In any case, the plane of Yesod is one abstraction away from reality, because it is one step before the final product. For example, individual different rocks don't exist in Yesod, but the idea of rocks in general exists, and perhaps a few subsets. Let's call this the dream of rocks. What comes to your mind when you think of a rock? Probably a pretty generic rock, stone-colored gray with a few blunted edges. That is what exists in the realm of the dream. This is fractal because within the dream of a rock is all rocks, yet within one individual rock is the dream of rocks, which connects it to all other rocks, but differentiates it. Basically, the same pattern, but a smaller portion of the greater pattern. What comes into reality is up to chance, or the influence of the gods, but we will get to that. Going further, the collective concept of a YouTube video or a book would be in Yesod. Some subsets, like a fantasy book or a horror book, may also exist, but individual concrete items do not exist in Yesod. They only take their final form in Malkut. So, to put this in the basic sense. This is the realm of forms that Plato talks about in the allegory of the cave. Only concepts exist here in their purest form. Now ask yourself, what is more real? A specific chair or the form of a chair? Which one persists more easily through time? While the specific chair can be touched by the senses, the form of a chair is more real because it will always persist into existence so long as there are bipedal creatures who sit. The physical chair may decay over time. The form of a thing is more real than the thing itself, and you may start to realize that the higher we go, the more your concept of what is real may change. Now you might wonder how the realm of forms could be abstracted higher, but to go beyond form is to begin to think in force and pattern, the sephirah of Netzach and Hod. These are the next two sephirah, which you will notice are on the same level of abstraction. Actually, the merging of these two things is what creates a lower form of abstraction, in that of the realm of forms, the dream. However, Netzach is considered higher because it is the positive end of the pole and begins the cycle. As we go higher, the sephirah take on many more names because they become harder to describe. The realm of forms, or the dream, is enough for Yesod, and physical plane is certainly enough to describe Malkut. For Netzach, it can be called the realm of the lesser gods, the realm of emotion, the realm of desire, the realm of force, and perhaps the realm of influence. These are the forces that just seem to exist in the universe, and the emotions and passions that just seem to exist within us. For example, the force of passion and its darker form of anger. Why do those forces exist within us? Now, imagine the force of passion as an actual agent of creation of the universe. Remember that there must be a force to create a form. So this is a causal force of the universe, and a causal force form the lower parts of you. Okay, so humans can understand this intuitively. What physical things do you associate with passion or with anger? Fire, heat, the sun, lava, the color red, blood, perhaps, and really most things associated with heat. Because heat is how the force of passion manifests into the plane of form and then the physical plane. Extending this further, passion and anger rule over the forms of many things. The form of fire, the form of fighting, the form of war, the form of friction, the form of training, the form of explosions, and the form of anything that involves the assertance of self over something else. Both objects and humans act through the force of passion in this world. Another force would be power and influence. What forms would this result in? Another would be excitement. Another would be anxiety. And yet another would be lust. What physical things and abstracted forms would relate to and be a result of these? We have named them emotions because they are forces that emote us, or in other words, bring about motion within us, or action. They move us. And what most don't realize is that these forces are a part of the universe as well as we are, and they move the universe too, but we also have the power to move them at higher levels. Next, Hod is the pattern that the forces fall into to create different forms based on the values of force and pattern. The force and pattern are really the same thing, but the pattern is essentially the lack of the force, the void of the universe of which the force goes into, and the pattern that is inevitably created from the nature of the force. Hod is also known as logic, category, mathematics, and measurement. The world of science often uses a Hod way of thinking to find patterns in the universe, whereas Netzach is more of an emotional or force-like way of thinking, one that our ancestors used more often than us. To understand Hod, it's important to know what the force is doing and the pattern it is caught up in. So taking the passion force, passion and anger, is about establishment of self as separate, or obtaining control, getting what you want. So imagine two rocks being rubbed together. Both want to persist in their own existence. In fact, rocks are so simple, that's all they ever want. As they rub together, both are persisting in their existence, and this results in friction. What would be the pattern of two objects rubbing up against each other or coming into conflict with their boundary of being? It would be a release of heat caused by the passion force getting charged, or a release of energy due to both objects trying to maintain themselves. The two atoms split apart, causing heat, or the two atoms shift into other atoms, causing heat. The friction of change. Basically, any resistance to change releases heat, just like change in the state of your circumstances causes a hot-like emotion, especially if there is resistance, and if it seems that you're unable to change your circumstances when you so desire, you may come up with frustration, another hot-like emotion. These things are fractal because the force runs through many levels. The pattern then is basically the law of thermodynamics on the physical level, but also the heat of change in the emotional resistance that comes with it, like stress and maybe burnout when you have worked too hard at enacting a change. Do you ever wonder why people use a heat word for these kinds of feelings? It is all connected. The release of energy or heat is the rebalancing pattern of the use of the passion desire. And it is that rebalancing which is what hold does. And it is why it has a pattern. It is rebalancing the nature of that force so that other forces may interact, and that a harmony is maintained, which is higher than these two levels, and therefore why it is maintained. Since I have really only given one example of one of the forces that are in the universe, let me give you the secret to knowing most of the others. Your mind is a reflection of the universe, because you were created from the universe, and therefore the forces that emote you, your emotions, are also the forces that emote the universe, and the forces of Netzach. They were put into pantheons as gods during the pagan times, and still in some religions. Fear, ambition, passion, excitement, desire, lust. How would these forces manifest as forms? What patterns would they take? And what would they look like in a human? And what would they look like in the universe? And most importantly, what is beyond these forces in the next level of abstraction? What do these forces revolve around? This brings us to the next level of abstraction. Yes, it goes further, and actually this is the last level of abstraction that we can truly understand. The next level is called the Christ Center, and represents the concept of balance and harmony itself, and it represents self, Tipareth, the balance of patterns or cycles as the center that cycles turn around, and as the center of emotional forces, and the center of universal forces. Actually, in the times of Jesus Christ, many people did not have last names. Christ was a title given to Jesus for achieving this level of consciousness, and thus becoming the center of human consciousness, at least in the West, for the past 2,000 years. As you can probably surmise, balance is a higher form of abstraction to the differing forces, patterns, and forms. It is what these things revolve around, and it is what the ancients called the soul or consciousness today. If one reaches this level, it means that their consciousness, their soul, is pure, free of sin, and in complete harmony with all animating forces and patterns of the mind and of the world, which means that this person is above these things, being able to bring into balance that which is out of balance. And that is the process of healing, which is why Christ heals. This point of abstraction is actually so abstract that we can really only call it the soul or consciousness. It is the center of a system. The sun would be a symbol of this. Your true self would be a symbol of this. A leader whom others willingly gather around would be a symbol of this. The process of healing itself, a returning to the homeostasis, to the true form of the being, would be a symbol of this. And lastly, homeostasis, or the maintenance of a type of being, is an example of this level of abstraction. As an emotional example, imagine yourself centered, without feeling. Usually that manifests as a sort of peaceful feeling or satisfaction or ease. This is your natural state, and all the other emotions revolve around it, either positive, negative, strong, weak. They all move around the self, which is higher than it, and also creates it. And this manifests on all planes and is fractal. So you could see this as the sun being the center of our solar system, and how the planets revolve around it, and the sun generally caused the planets to exist and to be in order, and also for the nebulous of clouds around it. But it circulates a higher center, at the center of the galaxy, and beyond this, the galaxy circles even greater centers beyond. Another example would be how the Earth is the most balanced planet in terms of distance from the sun, in terms of heat and cold, manifesting its ecosystem as the center from which life on Earth revolves around. Going even further beyond, we have creation and destruction, Chesed and Geburah, which, similar to Hod and Netzach, are on the same level of abstraction. However, Chesed is held as being higher because it is the positive end of the pole. And these two, working together, create the harmony from which force and pattern originate. Before the concept of harmony, or better called beauty, as harmony does manifest as beauty, before this can be realized, there first must be the higher abstraction of creation and destruction. The reason that these abstractions are fractal is because they hold within them the seeds of their lower, more detailed forms. Creation can in fact create the concept of harmony and so on. Creation is higher than destruction, as destruction is creation's empty aspect, like I mentioned. And creation and destruction in their interactions, or wave pattern, since they are really the same thing, give birth to the center, or Tepareth, harmony, as the highest of created concepts. Think of it as the heart from which the body grows around, and from which the rest of creation spawns. And then those creations that stray too far from the heart are destroyed, often by Geburah, in order to maintain the core of the creation, harmony. There cannot be harmony without destruction. And you can even view this as really the only creation is that harmonic center. And the more complex this center can grow, the more different aspects it can balance around itself, creating a more complex being. Yet from creation really is just the center, the main creation. Going even further beyond, what holds within it creation itself? What is even more abstract? Meaning, of course, that it can be expressed in more things, and also hold within it the seed of creation itself. That would be Binah, emptiness. Only from emptiness may sprout the seed of creation. Otherwise, one is simply combining what he knows into a new thing, just finding the greater center. Not true creation, but often what we humans think creation is. True creation comes from complete emptiness, with no surrounding influences. What could possibly be beyond emptiness? Bina's positive aspect, Chakma, infinity. Truly, emptiness and infinity are the same thing along a scale. To imagine infinite possibility is to imagine too much at once, an infinite white space of all things happening at once. In order for creation to take root, there must be an empty space. An empty space from which infinity can pour its energy so that there is a space for individual things. Like the concept of creation to take root, to eventually create a center from which all other creation can revolve around. Infinity, which has all things, must also have infinite emptiness by its own nature of being infinite. Therefore, the seed of emptiness lies within infinity. Now you may notice that we skip something. Usually after a polarity abstraction, for example, creation and destruction, come the balanced one that supersedes it and then leads to the next polarity abstraction. Yet we just jump straight into emptiness and infinity. There should be one that comes from infinity and emptiness, an intermediary state before that of creation, and what emptiness passes through to get to creation. Many call this the abyss to illustrate our lack of understanding beyond Tipareth. We can use reason to see further beyond to the abstractions beyond us at the poles. So for example, infinity and emptiness. We can kind of reason that those must exist. But to find the matrix point, the center that emptiness turns the power of infinity into, or in other words, what is the thing that stabilizes infinite source when it enters into endless nothingness? Some say it is love, or the force of attraction, gravity on the physical plane, which mysteriously causes all things to come together, perhaps allowing the creation of a harmony point. Even through the outpouring of infinity into emptiness that should be endless. It does make some sense, as love may hold within it the seed of creation, meaning that love births the will to create, as it certainly does on the physical plane with sex. However, how the force of attraction, love, or gravity comes from infinity pouring into emptiness is still a mystery. Others say it is knowledge itself, perhaps the knowledge of every single combination of infinity and emptiness, which, perhaps that knowledge is the knowledge of what aspects of the universe can come together into the creation of a being. Perhaps that knowledge is what aspects of the universe can love. Or perhaps that knowledge is the knowledge that all comes from one source, and the path back to that singular unity is love. Now, ironically, while the abyss is something difficult for our minds to understand, we can give a name, at least, to the abstraction beyond infinity, because it simply must be so. Beyond infinity, and the highest abstraction possible, in this universe at least, is God. That is the everything seed. It is the unknowable spirit, the animating force behind everything. And because it is all things, we can only describe it as spirit. However, because it tends to create what is harmonious, or good, at the center of things, we can use Tipareth to guess at its nature, which is goodness, harmony, and beauty. And the dualities that may not be so, that may cause some friction against other things disbalanced towards it, are simply on a higher plane, a way to create greater and greater systems of harmony, to which the whole of the greater system can express a greater and larger beauty. And sometimes there are growing pains, which is most of the bad things that we experience. So its nature is perhaps goodness itself, and the growth of goodness as chaotic forces encircle the center. And so in summary, we have, from the bottom, the physical plane, the plane of form or dream, the plane of cycles or pattern, set in motion by the plane of forces, revolving around that harmonic center, the Christ center, which comes from destruction, maintaining creation's center, which comes from emptiness, which receives its charge from infinity, the infinity of the Great Spirit of God.